Hi everybody, it's B007 back again in continuing the series of our DVD commentaries on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy in the extended edition format. And once again, I'm super happy to be joined by Matthieu.
Hi everyone.
And as before, just a shout out to Vassals of Kingsgrave, which is a podcast of which Matthieu is part. And, you know, if you want more Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion goodness, then do go and check them out at VOK Podcast because they're doing great reread series of it. So far we've done Fellowship of the Rings, 2 parts, and we've also done the first half of the Two Towers extended edition. So when we begin today, we are going to begin on chapter 31. So we finished with Of Stewed Herbs and Rabbit, and we're going to pick up in a similar theme with dwarf wives and I think Eowyn trying to cook, so which is an all-new scene, I think, for this extended edition. So we're going to now try and count ourselves down to make sure we're broadly in sync. It's never quite
Yeah,
worked perfectly. So I'm
yeah,
going to say 3, 2, 1, go, and on go you press the play button. So
yeah. hmm
3, 2, 1, go. There we go. So we have a nice little... Well, this is all the wives and children and everyone going off to war, right?
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's something that you don't see because they are not, going with the men in the books, right? They're going to Dunharrow, I think.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I think this is probably to wrap up the stakes, generally, because otherwise, if it's just the men fighting, then it's nothing. It's probably less. I mean, you
Oh, here we go. So here's,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. So this is the comedic Gimli falling off the
yeah,
horse because he's a dwarf thing, that some
yeah.
people might
But
object to.
yeah, I mean, I like the fact that he's like, more comedic in the films because you sort of need that at some point. Otherwise, it's just people being very serious all the time, which is, I think there's a need for levity. Especially this stuff about dwarf women being actually close looking to the men. It's actually accurate in the books. They have beards as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
But also,
and
we're about to enter into this horrible Helm's Deep siege, and if we don't have a
yeah,
few moments of, Eowyn looking lovingly at Aragorn and a few bits of comedy, then yeah, I think it's better, like you say, it levens things up. So here we come with Eowyn's cooking school.
oh yeah, I mean, that sort of scene. I can understand why they cut it for the cinematic version because it's, just a moment. It's just another joke. We already had a joke in the previous scene, so I don't think it's necessary to keep it. I mean, it gives us an insight into Aragorn's age, but apart from that, it's not
And also to the
relevant.
fact that he's courteous, like he will try to pretend, which I think
Yeah,
speaks to how he'll be as a king, which is trying to get buy-in. But it's kind of sad to me because Eowyn's like the one kick-ass, awesome woman, and then
yeah.
it's kind of, making her yet another female carer trope. So yeah, his face when he's trying to
I think
swallow this
she's
stuff.
just more nuanced. I mean, I think she's just nuanced. I mean, to me, a good female character is not necessarily a woman who fights a lot. You as long as you're complex as a character, even if you are sort of in the housewife position. I mean, to me that's much more important. Like if you have nuance, then I'm fine with
Yeah, I
any.
completely agree.
Yeah, I mean Eowyn is much more interesting than Arwen. Let's just say that.
From a low
It's
benchmark, dude. From a low benchmark.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I haven't seen any other female character in fantasy films, like, I mean, big budget fantasy films that is as complex as Eowyn in the Lord of the Rings films, I think. To me,
I
it's,
agree.
I have to struggle to find one. So,
Well, would you say there's one in A Song of Ice and Fire?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there are lots of good female characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's just that I was talking about, movies like big budget cinema, because there aren't a lot
Oh,
of
okay. Yeah,
fantasy
that's
films.
true.
But definitely, like A Song of Ice and Fire has a lot of good female characters as well. I mean, Cersei, for instance, like she's completely bonkers, but that's why we like her. I think to that
That
extent.
also, I don't know. As you know, I'm a big Cersei apologist, but I mean,
Uh,
I think in a sense, in big budget movies, I often think that sometimes sci-fi has more complex female characters.
hmm.
Ripley, obviously, in the Alien
Oh
series,
yeah,
but yeah, sometimes it just feels like sci-fi does women better than fantasy, or maybe we just have less fantasy films. So,
I think the
oh,
fact
here we go,
is
another
that
dreamy little Aragorn Arwen
yeah.
scene.
But I think that in fact with fantasy, it's the problem is that it's mostly set in a medieval European setting, at least in American and English speaking cinema in general. I think there's a lot of
Despite which
tendency to
Arwen has
it's
makeup by Bobby Brown.
yeah. I mean,
It's a lot of lipstick in this scene.
a very good skin cream. Uh,
It's a lot of makeup.
yeah, but generally I don't have a problem with Liv Tyler. I like her fair enough in the films.
Yeah,
But
she was. I mean, she got a lot of grief when she was cast, didn't she? But I think she's lovely as Arwen. She's so pretty.
yeah, and she hasn't done much after Lord of the Rings, I think, as well, which is sad
I think
because
she went and had kids and sort of.
yeah,
I think that was deliberate. I mean, because she was huge at this point. She could have done anything.
yeah, that's why I was surprised that she didn't go for anything. But yeah, I think she was in a Kevin Smith movie as well. But
Oh, she was in that awful. Was it Jersey Girl?
yeah, I think it
Oh,
was that. Wasn't it?
Jesus Christ, that
Yeah.
was a bad film. And I love Kevin Smith, but that was just terrible.
Yeah, I haven't seen. I think I haven't seen any Kevin Smith films. I just the only one that I've been told I should watch is there's only one. What's it called again?
Clerks.
Clerks. Yeah.
Yeah, you should watch Clerks. And the advice that, the distributor gave to Harvey Weinstein, just bear with it. Like, the first 10 minutes you'll be thinking, what is this about? But just bear with it, because it's like, there's so many quotable lines as well. And a lot of, like, if you love your Star Wars, there's lots of hilarious Star Wars geekery as well.
Yeah, there's also like in Clerks 2. I mean, that clip I have seen where they talk about Lord of the Rings, basically that the first film is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as good a film as the original Clerks, but yeah, there's a bit of Lord of the Rings ripping.
Yeah,
More walking.
Yeah, I mean, I personally prefer Lord of the Rings to Star Wars any day.
I don't think Tolkien would approve of this scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Elven Rumpy Pumpy.
and yeah, it's once again like you have I mean, this is a love plot that is well written enough that it doesn't stand out as being tropey. Like if you look at the Hobbit films, it's basically like you're aware that that they're forcing it into the film. Here it's
True.
not. I mean, it's much more natural because that's part of the extended material that was available, and it was explored enough that they could go into it. But
Okay, so explain to me this. Like, so basically Elrond's going to become Aragorn's father-in-law.
yeah,
Could Elrond take Aragorn in a fight? He's more powerful, right?
I don't know at this point. It's like
Really?
he's been like he's pretty old, but I don't think that he's been like fighting a lot, being in Rivendell and so on.
Do
So
elves not get more powerful with age, or is that just like the might? That's no.
could be. I'm not exactly sure about that, but to
I
me,
mean, this
it's,
is a facetious conversation, obviously, because I'm asking about like.
to me the most interesting thing is that he doesn't want anyone who is less than the King of Gondor to marry his daughter. So it's a lot of. I mean, that's a very high expectation. So. And it's also like something that we recently discussed in the Silmarillion discussion about Beren and Luthien.
Okay, so you've done the Baron and Luthien on VOK now.
Yeah, we
Cool.
finished it. I mean, we devoted a whole episode to it, and so yeah, it's a 50-page chapter.
Okay, so for people like me who don't really know much about it, just give us the sort of short version of Baron and Luthien.
yeah, Beren is a mortal man. Luthien is an elf. They fall in love, and she makes a choice to stay behind, and becomes mortal, and so they both die. And then afterwards, I mean,
Is he a king
it's
though?
okay.
Like, is he highborn and whatnot?
Beren, yeah, he's sort of the descendant of noble people. But yeah, they're at the point where he meets Luthien. They're sort of outcasts and vagabonds, and yeah, fighting against Morgoth. And
Yeah,
also,
so like this with Strider, kind of like he's kingly, but
yeah,
at the
sort
moment
of.
he's an outcast kind of thing, and yeah.
And that's also something that we're going to see, like the Ring of Barahir is also something that Beren has because it's his father's ring, and so that's going to get mentioned here in the Two Towers.
I just want to mention sword hilts and pillions of horse saddles, so beautiful.
Yeah, and Hammer gets killed.
Oh,
Orcs. I mean, in the book they sort of chop him up in front of Helm's Deep, right? So
so you
and-
think this is preferable, basically?
Yeah, probably. It's like, getting killed by a giant wolf. It's like, yeah, you sort of, um, it's not going to be a slow death or, torturous death or something like that. It's very direct. But, once again, I prefer the costumes of the orcs here than I do in the Hobbit films. Because I mean, they're just, they look like actual, like they're actually there.
But
Because
the
they,
Warg CGI, in fairness, has dated a little bit. It's a little bit kind of jerky, I
yeah.
think.
I mean, it looks too pretty in the Hobbit films, I think.
I mean, this is
It's too smooth.
this is a bit tauntaun, isn't it? It's a bit kind of, I don't know. I was never a big fan of just having, this scene. I just felt it was a bit
Oh,
like,
oh,
why
I
do you
like
need peril on the road in a way? I mean, just get to Helm's Deep and get on with the battle, peeps.
Yeah, I think it's just because in the books they say like Grima Wormtongue is riding across the land with, wolf riders and that sort of thing, and they didn't have the wargs attack them at the gates of Moria, like, so probably they just wanted to keep it at this point. I also think it's I mean, as you say, it's sort of to give this stakes because everyone is sort of threatened on the way. I mean, it's not sure that they're going to make it, so it's yeah. I think, but yeah, to me, it's just a good battle scene. I can't say anything more on it, except that this.
It's not as, I don't
Nicholas,
think it's a scene that anyone would miss if it went ahead, put it that way.
yeah. I mean, I also think that there's the orc that is sort of this guy who's leading them. He's called Shaku, which is what Saruman is called by his servants.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think this is sort of a nod to that as well, kinda, because they had to leave it
Oh,
up.
here we go. This is like an elf backflipping over a horse.
Yeah,
FFS. I mean, unnecessary.
I,
Like,
you
we
know,
get elves are
it's,
cool. They don't need to be like Olympic gymnasts.
no, but it's just because they're so perfect.
It's just so
Uh,
egregious. It's like, this is Peter Jackson, though. This is like the brain dead Peter Jackson. This is the kind of guy who just loves excess. Like, why not? Why can't I have it?
yeah,
He's
I mean,
literally greedy for this stuff.
it's not like in the last Hobbit film where he basically jumps on falling rocks and that sort of thing. This is still more believable in a way, I think. And I like the fact that Gimli has to sort of get sort of buried beneath uh, the warg and the orc, and I mean, sort of,
Is this kind of the start of the friendship of Gimli and Legolas when they kind of,
yeah,
save each other? Maybe it's the start of the trust.
yeah. I think it's basically, I mean, because like Legolas sort of killed a warg that was going to attack Gimli anyway, so I think that's sort of meant to convey that they are getting, that they care for each other in a certain way. So,
Oh my god, did I tell you I'm going to probably go to the set to Hobbiton
oh, really?
on Good Friday, basically, if it's open. I have to
Oh,
check.
wonderful.
Because I'm going to New Zealand for the first time and I'm going to Auckland, so I was like, I just have to take a day and do that.
Yeah,
That's just too cool not to do.
yeah. You could also, I mean, if you want to, there are other locations for the film that you can visit. I haven't been to New Zealand myself, but this is also something like I like that this sort of battle sort of still showcases the geography and the environment, like there are large plains and all that stuff. Very diverse environment in New Zealand. So
Yeah, I know, it's absolutely the perfect place to film. It's so beautiful.
yeah, I mean,
And Peter Jackson knows how to use it as well. And actually, there must be very few directors who know how to do good natural landscape kind of photography and framing, and then
mm,
all the CGI stuff. I mean, they're quite different skill sets, so it's pretty
yeah.
cool. Oh, and Aragorn's dead.
Mm.
I
Oh,
mean, this is
it's
a cheap trick. I mean, even like,
yeah.
well, I remember watching this in the movies with like some friends who hadn't seen this before, but even they figured out that that's not, this isn't
No,
George R. R. Martin. He's not dead.
yeah, but someone has to see, where the army of Urukai is at some point. So, yeah, they just said, maybe it's necessary to get Aragorn there so that he can witness it. But at the same time, I don't know. So yeah, he got the jewel, um, and
Well, that's such a gnarly orc death.
Yeah. So they're not gonna. I mean, still, like to me, it's always like orcs don't ask for mercy. I don't know. They never do, and I mean that's to me
Neither
it's
do
just
they
like
ask for dental floss.
yeah, but it's just like to me it's like they never give mercy because they never ask for it either. So it's like
Maybe it's a concept they just don't know about. Maybe it's just literally
uh,
beyond their sort of
yeah, but that's
vocabulary and conceptual map. I don't know.
yeah, but that sort of implies that they are completely irredeemable, which I don't, I don't ascribe to that sort of thing because in the books there, I mean, we get some insight into what the orcs think of the whole situation. They don't like it much more than our heroes. Um,
But
because
there are no good orcs, are there? There are no.
no, I mean, there's a line at the end of the Silmarillion basically where it says like every creature, was divided on that day when the Battle of Last Alliance happened. So it's like, birds and beasts and everything that lives fought on both sides. So, you could
So
maybe
there
make,
were good orcs.
yeah, you could maybe make, yeah, I mean, you could stretch it, but it's like, yeah, I don't see how that could, how that could conceivably be, true because no one likes the orcs anyway. So, they wouldn't be able to, get along with anyone. Um, but yeah, here is a good shot of Helm's Deep.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Which I, always liked the way that they sort of made it into the mountainside, and so I mean, it's also the same place where they shot the Battle of Minas Tirith, isn't it?
I mean, just look how beautiful those doors are as they open them with all that paneling. And oh, you can tell this is an early Eowyn film scene because I haven't figured out how to do her hair yet.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
also, like in some of the earlier scenes she shoots, she has a kind of like Irish accent. Oh, I love this statue. Like this is what I love in this world, just seeing these old, like the Argonath, just these old remnants of this beautiful, valorous time. It's just so
yeah.
romantic with a big capital R, It's
Yeah, and it's like the attention to detail is, I think it's here much more than in the Hobbit films. So it's
and it
um
really does feel hewn into the rock. It's there's just something tangible, like visceral, like you really feel you're in that world.
mhm. Yeah. So now
Potatoes.
we get the yeah, and sort of like later Gimli sort of tells Eowyn that Aragorn is seemingly dead. So which is also something that it's meant to uh sort of get us the idea of the love triangle again, which I don't have a problem with necessarily. Um, but yeah, it's not much more than that. So
Bernard
um,
Hill being all awesome.
yeah, and
Again, just like look at the cuffs on his red, like velvet undershirt and these beautiful gold braided cuffs.
mm,
It's just stunning. Oh no. You can tell it's bad news because he's taken off his helmet, and he rarely takes off his helmet.
yeah, yeah.
Wise man.
Where is he? Yeah, he fell. Yeah, he literally fell from a cliff. So
Dodgy glance from the father.
yeah,
Very British. I'm going to hold it all in. I'm not going to give you a hug, daughter, because we're of a kingly line. We don't do that shit.
yeah. They're not actually. He's not a father, but
It must be very cool. Yeah, but like, in locus parentis, it must be amazing to just stand on a battlement and look out and know that you own that battlement. Like, this is my castle that I defend. That
yeah,
feeling of kind of old kingly ownership. Like, I guess no one in modern times knows what that feels like, really. Maybe
yeah.
Vladimir Putin.
We get a shot of the tunnel of the tunnels, right?
I mean,
Um,
for heaven's sake, it's just so. In a
yeah.
sense, like with Tolkien, sometimes it is a little bit cheeky, like, oh, the chink in the armor, quite literally.
Yeah, and so
Ooh,
Grima
weapons of
Wormtongue,
mass destruction.
yeah, Grima Wormtongue nearly blows them up, right?
Green Wormtongue, you
So
dolt! What are you bringing a candle flame towards
yeah,
my gunpowder for?
I
Moron.
mean, this scene is sort of where the parallels between Saruman and Hitler are much more explicit, right?
Yeah,
Because
for
it's
sure.
like really um
Except that
because
technically it was always Hitler who was the moron and his generals who were much more clever.
uh true.
Oh,
Mm,
look at these squares. Brilliant.
yeah. And I mean, I think that Christopher Lee has sort of a voice that is really like I mean, it's really unique. I want him to be in everything basically because he's just like he has the most awesome voice.
He is
Um,
just an awesome person, isn't he?
yeah, because he's been like he's done stuff like that goes back to the 80s, which I've seen. Like he was in The Last Unicorn in the English and the German version, playing the same character.
Which is hilarious.
Yeah, because it's like I mean he speaks German
I lo-
fluently,
Let's just
and
like admire this pullback scene as Peter Jackson pulls back the camera through the ranks of the army.
yeah.
He actually directs battle really well. Like not many people, like proper military battle to direct it so you feel it's the shape of the troop movements and stuff is not that easy.
But once again, like you notice that here these are real actors, like real stuntmen in those costumes, right? In the Battle of the Five Armies, what bothered me was the fact that the warriors were sort of like doing the same thing, like in squadrons. Like it's like really, you notice that it's not realistic because they all like turn at the same time and they
Yeah,
do the same
rowboat
thing at the
orcs.
same time. You have this sort of thing doesn't happen in a lot of the Rings films.
Oh,
It's
tree
like
bird.
yeah, and yeah, Merry and Pippin see Saruman's army leave, which they also do in the books, right? I mean, they
Yeah, yeah.
um
I think the difference is, or we talked about this last time, the key difference is that here they are persuaders, whereas
yeah.
in
Yeah,
the
it was just
books, as soon as they tell Tribid and as soon as he calls the enemy, they're like off to war, aren't they? Whereas here they really have to rouse them.
yeah, and here's
Sean
Aragorn.
Bean. Oh no, Aragon, sorry. I just
Yeah,
see dead people and I think Sean Bean.
that's
It's like automatic programming.
that's so sad, when you have that kind of stigma in a way, because Sean Bean can never play a character without anyone thinking, "Oh, I wonder when he's gonna croak."
He's almost becoming like the Chuck Norris of our time, isn't he?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's like I haven't seen him like I mean I've seen him in Black Death with Karis Van Houten as well, where they're both sort of playing um the knight and the witch role. It's like Ned versus Melisandre in a way.
Excellent.
Um, but yeah, I mean even I mean it's probably I mean even because he's Sean Bean, like you can guess what happens. It's, yeah,
I
but
almost feel
I
like he almost needs like a career kind of jolt. Like he almost needs like when Liam Neeson did Taken and no one thought of him as an action star before then and now everyone thinks of him as an action guy. I feel Bean just needs one of those. Or like when Samuel L. Jackson did Pulp Fiction or John Travolta and suddenly they, like a total recasting. He needs to be in a Tarantino film probably.
yeah, no, I think he just needs to have a film where he doesn't die. Like people would talk about that, where basically he gets to live until the end. Like I don't know, like how because I haven't seen Jupiter Ascending, but he's in that as well.
Oh my
From what I
god,
from what I
Jupiter
hear,
Ascending.
yeah,
Oh.
from what I hear, he's part B in that film, which is
I saw
weird.
that film today, and
Oh,
nobody comes out of it well.
it's I mean I hear at least it looks nice. So
It looks nice, and it's got lots of amazing ideas, but it's just somehow
it's probably more like a romance novel, like it's just an airport novel or something like that, right?
it's just oh my god, the plot just is just nonsense, and it also doesn't make sense. So it's literally nonsense, like it's nonsensical, but it's overdone. It's just yeah. Back to Lord of the Rings, because that's
Yeah,
at least a good film.
because now we have the scene between Elrond and Arwen where they sort of discuss. I mean, this is a scene that I actually like a lot because it's like it talks about the future and uses a lot of imagery that I particularly like, but especially here where she's sort of mourning Aragorn's dead body in the future, um, which then turns into, I mean, slowly turns into a statue, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful imagery.
Yeah,
Which is
it's also
obviously
like
what he'll become, right? I mean, it's the sarcophagus on his tomb.
yeah, and you see like in the background, you see like Gondorian buildings, right? It's like we haven't seen a lot of Gondor yet, so
It's really poetical, isn't it? And then the leaves falling on it, and
hmm it's basically that's sort of like autumn and winter and all that stuff. It's and nicely conveyed, and it's mostly not plot. I mean, it's not plot driven. It's basically lingering on on certain emotions, and Elrond making his point basically that he wants to convince her to sort of leave.
I mean, in a sense, it's just a very simple idea, isn't it? A woman
Yeah.
mourning by a team. Yeah, it's just one of the examples of the filmmakers and the screenwriters just coming up with a concept that's so pure and simple and so true to the book, and
Mm.
yet totally different from it. It's really wonderful.
Yeah. And then, sort of Arwen cries a bit. And yeah, because it's also something that you don't necessarily see. I mean, you don't necessarily expect that much because the elves are so removed emotionally from everything in The Lord of the Rings. Like they're different in The Hobbit. In The Hobbit, they're sort of like jokey and stuff, and they enjoy themselves much, much more. Here,
She actually looks quite a lot like Evangeline Lilly as Toriel here.
yeah, that's what I mean. Like they probably wanted to cast an actress for a Toriel character, um, who is not in the books, by the way. But they
Famously.
wanted to cast Evangeline Lilly, which I mean, I know that she was on Lost, but I never watched Lost because I hear the ending is god awful. So
Yeah, I mean, I
so
have it all, but people keep telling me just not to bother because it's just painful.
yeah,
Well, this
and
is a really moving scene. I mean, it's just so visually beautiful and haunting.
yeah, where they're sort of carrying the lanterns like
Yeah.
through the night and all that sort of thing. That's sort of the idea of hidden people and fairies and all that stuff, which I quite like actually, because you can see where they draw the influences from, and it's
Absolutely. I completely agree.
and,
Oh, last look at her dad.
and so Galadriel sort of mentally talking to Elrond as well. I mean that sort of thing. I kind of it's not explicitly stated that they have these sort of powers, right? But I mean I could see uh, Galadriel being able to do that because she's just the oldest person alive apart from Sauron in Middle Earth.
I
So
agree. And if the bad guys have Palantir, then the good guys should at least have ESP.
yeah, and once again, like Sauron is in the books he's much more the uh, arch enemy, but in the films they have to sort of they have to make Saruman a presence without diminishing the threat of Sauron, so they make Saruman much more pliable. Sorry. Um, it's like in the books he's sort of has a rivalry going with Sauron, even though it's like he's just imitating him, and
Yeah, I think they explain it really nicely here, actually, setting up the two, like visually. So,
mm,
even very obviously that Sauron's in red with the eye and Saruman's in white with a hand, and I think
yeah,
it's very easy to, I would imagine, it's easy to understand for people who haven't read the books what's going
mm.
on here.
And yeah, they talk about the ring as well, um, and yeah, shots of Sam and Frodo with the ranges, which I guess you don't like where this plot is going anyway. I mean, in the film, at least in this film, I
Yeah.
could see if they get back to where Faramir originally was in the books in the third film. But yeah, in film number two, I mean, that's to me,
So
it just makes more sense.
we've
Um,
actually not been with the ring for a long time now. Do you realize we've been in
yeah,
30 minutes into this half and now we're finally getting to the ring?
yeah,
I never realized we left it for so long.
yeah, because there are lots of other moments that are important, and I think if you just were to focus on the ring the whole time, you would probably get to the end much faster. But
No,
I
I
think
think it's
yeah,
just more that I think I remembered it as being much more intercut, but maybe with the
uh,
extended edition, that kind of rhythm of very,
mm,
methodically every 5 or 10 minutes going from one to the other just kind of gets a bit messed up.
yeah. So here now we get the map basically, the map that's also in the book, right? Because when I bought the German editions of the Lord of the Rings, they had this same map basically.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's in my paperback too.
Yeah,
Oh, I love Faramir.
yeah. I mean, it's just he's different in this film. So I get why they did it because if he's like Jesus and he doesn't get tempted at all by the ring, it's sort of it diminishes the power of the ring essentially, and that's to me is valid enough reason to change the character slightly. At least here they get him back to where he was in film number three.
Yeah, I will admit that my objections to changing the character of Faramir are not entirely rational.
No, that's, 'cause people have problems with this sort of stuff. I can understand it because it's like they enjoy the source material a lot. It's just that in the source material, to me, that particular part didn't make a lot of sense. Because, you essentially set this guy up to, why not give him the ring then in the book?
I don't
If
think
he's,
no, because of course he would eventually succumb to it. I think the way I think of it is it's like addiction, and different people submit to it at different paces. So Frodo eventually falls, and I
yeah.
think Faramir would have fallen more quickly than Frodo. He just, has a greater innate resistance than Boromir. And that's fine because he's wiser. He's spent more time with Gandalf, we know from the books. He's more learned. He has more to fear from it. And he's probably far more aware than Boromir was of what happened to his, to men before he fell for it. So
Yeah.
I don't think he's not with it for very long. I mean, in the books, they kind of come in, they get captured for, 1 or 2 nights, and then they're on their way.
Yeah, that's sort of the problem that I have with that part. It's because, it's like a nice stop in the middle of the story, basically.
Convenient pit stop.
Yeah, it's like, they're sort of at a tavern, basically. It's like they sort of have to rest for a couple of days before they get, going
But
again.
you kind of need it, don't you, in the context of the film? You really need it because it's the mechanism by which Smeagol Gollum, who's come to really kind of trust Frodo, feels
Yeah.
he's betrayed, and therefore you get
hmm
Shelob and you get all the other stuff. So we need the Forbidden Pool in the context of this film to then get us to the betrayal and Sam and the whole thing that's going to go down.
Yeah.
So
And we sort of get we get a mention of Boromir again, which I sort of also think like, Boromir is essentially, people mention him. It's like the Ned Stark thing again, like, once the character died, like lots of people still mention him in several books later in the Song of Ice and Fire. So this is sort of similar in that sense. And we see the dream, which was not in the theatrical version, where basically Faramir sees the boat with his dead brother inside.
which I love, and I love
Yeah.
seeing that. I like the idea that there's some kind of not mystical element to Faramir, but that because he has been hanging out with Gandalf and he is a bit learned, he is somehow tuning into a channel that's a little bit deeper than Boromir was,
Yeah.
and because you have to think of signs and portents. The concept that the horn came down the river and to him of all chances, and we're in that world, aren't we, where things mean things, everything's connected, and this wading out to the boat, it's so heartbreaking.
And here we have the scene, in Osgiliath, which I like a lot because we get a much more positive image of Boromir than we did, in the Fellowship.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've got to understand that he was a war hero, and that the merits of Boromir are not the merits that we've come to admire and recognize in Faramir and Gandalf of learning and wisdom and patience and humanity and mercy, but they are merits. He was a brave and noble man. He was, a man who loved his country and his people and was genuinely trying to do the right thing, and it's important to see that.
Mm. And so here we have the two brothers interacting, which you don't actually see anywhere else in the films. Yeah. So
It's also important, I think, to see a little bit of Minas Tirith as it was as a functioning, well, not functioning, a dying, but a kind of a brave and noble city, and like what is at stake? Because if you just only ever know it as corrupt and dead, then it's hard to imagine,
And we also get John Noble, who, people sort of tend to forget is actually very relevant to this relationship here.
Well, he's the entire motivating force, and it's
Yeah.
kind of nice to know that they are loving brothers despite his attempts to kind of favour one over the other. And in a sense, it would be very easy for Faramir to be resentful and for Boromir to be very ego-driven and kind of fall in with it. But it's nice to see that, like, they get each other and they have each other. It makes me feel better for Faramir, in a way.
But, Denethor isn't having any of it. Like, he doesn't, essentially he doesn't like Faramir.
What's up with that? What is up with that? What is the reason for that?
I think it wasn't there something about, Denethor's wife dying at some point.
So is this the proto Tywin Tyrion?
Sort of, probably. because I mean, as far as I remember, I always thought that she died in childbirth as well. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure about that. No, I might have to check it out. I mean, I have to check it out.
It's
But
so horrible though. Farmer's heart's breaking. Like he looks to his. What's
yeah,
amazing is, as a grown man, despite everything that he knows, he still looks to his father, kind of expecting to see, like with hope that this time he might give me approval. And
mm,
that's why I think these movies are relatable, right? Because the concept of dating someone that your dad's really skeptical about and having to maybe give up your family for him, like that story is very relatable. I think the kind of the love triangle is relatable if you believe in that. This is very relatable, like the
yeah.
seeking of approval you'll never get.
Mm.
There's so many little micro details in this crazy world that are very real.
But there is a difference, at least between Denethor and Tywin, because Denethor, despite everything that he says to his son openly in the book, at least he acknowledges. I mean, even though he wants to kill his son, uh, he wants to kill him because he sees no future for both of them. So it's like he admits indirectly that he still loves his son because he just has the one, but at the same time it's very destructive.
Oh, for sure. And even, but then again, I think that's true of his relationship as guardian of Minas Tirith.
Yeah,
He's not refusing to defend the city because he has contempt for the people of Minas Tirith.
no, no,
He's
that's
doing it because he truly
sees
believes,
no
from
hope.
what he's seen in the Palantir, that this is the despair is the only rational option.
Yeah,
And I totally agree with you. I think that he believes that his son is dead, but I
mm,
believe that he thinks that, go down in flames because there's no other choice. He's not malicious in a weird way. I mean, here
yeah.
he's malicious when he's just being a douchebag to his son.
I mean, would you say that I mean, just because we mentioned the idea of despair and all that sort of thing, do you think there is a moment where you can say, well, the facts of the situation don't bear out anything else? It's like sort of in a situation where there is nothing to be, expected. Um,
Well, I think that,
if-
I think this is exactly the trickery of Saruman's words and Sauron's Palantir, that he knows very well that by showing people certain things, and I
mm.
think it's also kind of like the red comet in
Oh yeah,
George R. R. Martin, that people will take from it what they will. So
yeah,
a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or touch
mm.
not the Pyrenean spring. Like he's had this little knowledge, and from that little knowledge, I think he makes a rational conclusion in a sense. But I do strongly believe that whole Palantir concept is Tolkien is Catholic, and there is a specific sin called the sin of simony, which is the sin of despair,
Uh,
of voluntarily like turning your face away from the face of God and refusing to hope. And the whole theme of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is hope. Like one must have hope in Frodo, even
yeah,
when all else seems dark. And I think what Denethor does seems to me a very modern reaction and a very understandable one,
yeah,
because we live in effectively a fairly secular, rational, cynical world. And that's why I think he resonates, because he's kind of like he and Saruman, I guess. But I have so much kind of sympathy with what Denethor does, even though I think it's profoundly wrong. I
mm.
can't hate him for it. I think it comes from a
Yeah,
place of love. And I think Cersei's a little bit the same, actually. I think a
yeah.
lot of
With
her decisions come from a place of love of her kids, genuine and righteous resentment of being overlooked as a woman, but then little bits of knowledge like the Maggie the Frog prophecy that you
yeah.
misinterpret and then drives you to insanity. So
But then then she does other things like knowingly giving people over to Qyburn and that sort of thing. Knowing that this guy is probably not that right. In the
which
sense that
Denethor doesn't do. Like Denethor
no,
never
but
gets to
yeah,
that point,
I'm
right?
just saying that that Cersei has a lot of also a lot of hateful sides to
She
her.
has spite and she
Yeah,
has real malice towards the end, but I don't think,
she's a
well,
misogynistic woman, isn't she? So
yeah. And
it's
what's interesting with Tyrion saying about her bullying him as a child is that she evidently had that mass sadistic streak as a child. Whereas I
mm,
truly believe that Denethor probably started out as a good warden and then became more and more despairing through the Palantir, and so
yeah,
was corrupted in the way that so was Theoden.
and we go on getting captured. Like we missed out on the little song that he sings, which is also
Oh,
it's
a
like
juicy fish is a nice.
yeah. But
He's
yeah,
so
they got,
cute.
and I think in the extended version, this sort of torture scene goes on a bit longer than in the theatrical version, like, crawling towards the viewer, trying to escape and that sort of thing, which is, you wouldn't expect. I mean, I can see where people might say this even, um, even considering that they had to make Faramir much more fallible, this might go a bit too far.
Yeah,
Uh,
Book Faramir just would not have done this.
yeah.
He just
I
wouldn't
mean,
have
I can
done.
see that, but you have to get Gollum to sort of resent Sam and Frodo again. Um, and
Yeah, so that was my point. I mean, I think it's like I don't get too worked up because I think it makes for a better book. It makes for a more dynamic book with more at stake, and
mm,
yeah, that's fine.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
to me, it's like this is sort of the idea of, you change the story and the characters in a way that I mean, makes your point and helps you get from point A to point B. I mean, it might not necessarily be in character for the book version, but at the same time, it still works on its own, I think, if you divorce it from the source material. Um, and
yeah.
yeah,
So it's not that we hate all differences. It's just when they. I mean, sometimes
it,
you need them for the format, and if they do that, that's cool.
there,
Basically.
are- there are moments also where, there are moments where Gollum looks actually really, really cuddly and stuff, and then there are moments where he basically looks really creepy, like where he basically says, my precious and that sort of thing. It's like, yeah. Um, which I think is still a testament to how good the motion capture work was, um, because otherwise, I mean, couldn't you wouldn't be able to get maybe that nuanced uh, a character, if I mean you basically wouldn't be able to get someone who looks like Gollum to do this, so
No, no.
you have to do CG, and in this, I mean, at least
So
with
well
Gollum,
done.
it's seamless, right?
It's amazing this didn't get an Oscar. It really is. It's so sad.
And we finally get a scene between Sam and Frodo again, right, where they talk about and Faramir interrupts. But this sentence, the things that Faramir is saying here, they are basically from the books as well. But in the books, the implications are different.
Yeah, which is weird, right? How you can recast text and just take it out of context.
Yeah, but it still works. I mean, if you think that that Faramir is basically tempted by the ring, you can have the dialogue and give it to a character who basically is different from the book character, but still.
Yeah, for sure. And look,
So,
the more words we get of Tolkien's, the better, right? So I'm not
yeah,
going to criticize. Um,
and that's also something like Faramir. I mean, I think that's why the cutting the scenes with Boromir from the theatrical version might have been a bad idea, because at least they give the context that Faramir in the film needs to do what he does, because otherwise it comes a bit,
yeah.
which is why
But
I
then, if you're a film viewer, you don't know that Faramir is this wonderfully good person, so
yeah.
maybe you don't need a reason for him to do corrupt and bad things because you just expect men to be corrupt and bad because you've seen Boromir. So
Yeah, I mean,
maybe
and
we
we
feel
also,
like we need justification for the change, but the film non-book reader, they're just going to take this and accept it. I think maybe.
we also see like Frodo, getting possessive about the ring more and more because
And Sam
that's
noticing even more crucially.
yeah, because he says like that's a burden and so on. So they want to go to Gilead, which is a detour that they don't do in the books, but and I think there are people who have a problem with them going to Osgiliath because essentially it's going further away than they are from the point where they are in the books.
But in a way, it's kind of like it's okay because they can't get to Mordor so quickly because we know that
Yeah,
the men have got to go through Helm's Deep. They've got to go through like
yeah.
Pelennor Fields. So
I mean, I also wanted to
I mean,
ask
if
you
they're
because
already, they've already been to the Get Black Gates, right? Last
yeah,
episode. So
I mean,
yeah,
I wanted to ask you like, do you think because at least the Fellowship of the Ring ended with the first chapter of the Two Towers, basically.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and here, I mean, it's no secret that the Two Towers ends before I mean, whole Shelob stuff is, and Cirith Ungol is all in the Two Towers. But I think if you had removed it from the Return of the King, there wouldn't have been as much left for Frodo and Sam to do.
Exactly, because I mean their journey is basically fairly straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, because they don't have Osgiliath, so really, once they reach the other side of the bank, I think it's basically just Shelob's the only obstacle, really, right? So if you want to keep switching back to them every 10 minutes, then you're going to need to invent some stuff.
And you have the orcs in the tower, basically, but yeah, you don't get that in the second film because that would just you had a whole battle. You don't need a giant spider and a tower full of orcs, because I mean the way they paced it, it seems like you can watch these three films as one continuous movie as well, which I think is a then there's no problem basically because then you're just following the story chronologically. And they also said, like, the Shelob stuff, and the Cirith Ungol. I mean, chronologically, it happens at the same time as.
Wait. We just need to give a shout out to that just landscape shot of Aragorn and his horse overlooking this plain towards Helm's Deep.
Oh, yeah.
That was just bloody amazing landscape photography. Sorry, as you were, please continue.
Yeah, it's because I think like they said that chronologically, some of the scenes that are in the Return of the King happen actually at that time in the in the story. Even though it's in book 2, it basically happens at the same time as stuff that's in book 3. So that's why they did it the way they did it, and it works better, I think, because this is basically an anti-climax. You have the big battle, which you work the whole movie towards, and once the big battle is over, then there's nothing you can do to top it. So, and yeah. That's why I think the way they organize the three films is actually it makes sense to me, because they also had to constantly rewrite the scripts and so on, and yeah, now we get Denethor sort of showing off his fortress to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli.
Look how cool my fortress is.
Yeah, it's like, isn't there a game in A Song of Ice and Fire where it's like take my castle?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the sort of something like that.
Oh no, and he's giving him back his girlfriend's necklace, and now she's all sad.
Yeah.
Oh, the scene where he like pushes open the door and his hair's dripping wet, it's just so ridiculous. It's like so spoofable.
Yeah,
it's
slow motion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, he should just like be shirtless in that scene. It's so ridiculous.
Because it's like the king has arrived.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of, which also like people don't like that Theoden is much more indecisive.
Yeah, I'm one of those people actually. Like I get that we have to inject drama, because if there's not drama, if there's not conflict, then movies don't work. And so for all the characters, so Aragorn becomes more doubting, so Arwen can help him, and Faramir becomes more conflicted, so that we can have an extra episode there, and then we have Bernard Hill, his Theoden has to be actually quite vacillating, so that Aragorn can help him. But I would have I don't think it makes sense, because like once we know he was a great king, so once that spell of Saruman has been removed, surely he goes back to just being a strong king, right? It seems a bit kind of like not everyone has to be vacillating. Can't some people?
No, of course. But it's like you get an arc with Theoden that you don't have with Denethor, for instance. I mean, Denethor is just, he's constantly despairing, but he doesn't manage to overcome his despair. And, the film version of Theoden is much more in the same spot that Denethor is in movie 3. So, if he has more doubts here in the Two Towers, then, by the time he shows up on the Pelennor Fields, it's, you've seen the change in the character, which
that's why I think they did it, because I think basically the writers thought, okay, we've got this one siege here, and then we've got another siege later. He's on both of them, albeit on different sides of the siege wall, and people love. I mean, I love Theoden at Pelennor Fields because he's so courageous and he knows he's going to die, and it's the one last battle of the old noble warrior, and we embrace him, and we embrace him all the more because we saw him here being really vacillating. So it kind of works in a sort of cheesy way, but
it's
you can see why they did it, because it was just like, oh no, movie audiences can't cope with two things which are the same. I think.
No, I mean, I think like people would have said, this character just doesn't, change at all. Which they might say that this is not a, not a nuanced character necessarily. I mean, that's also something that people have been, criticizing about the books, is that, most of the characters are sort of archetypes. They don't change a lot necessarily. Like I mean, Aragorn in the books is much more self-assured and much more.
Yeah, for sure. But it just feels like they've gone too. It just feels they've gone too far the other way here. Like everybody now has an arc. Like in the book, no one has. Well, not no one has an arc. Lots of people have arcs in the books, but it tends to be the hobbits who have arcs in the books.
Yeah,
and I think that tells you a lot about who Tolkien cares about.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's also something that Roger Ebert said, when the films came out. He said, at least with the second film, he felt that, the hobbits weren't the focus as much as they should have been, probably. Because he said, these are the main characters, basically, and they're not given
it's
a
Hobbit
lot of...
POV, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, like Gimli in Return of the King has a lot of... And also, like Aragorn has some chapters in the Two Towers.
Okay, so speaking of which, we're back to the R2D2 and C3PO of this movie. They kind of make shit happen in a comic way. They're like the comic people who actually make events happen that the real heroes think that they have caused, but without these guys, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, and I think I like this version of the persuasion of the ends much more, because in the books you're sort of just left saying, okay, well, we're not privy to this conversation, and it's basically an easy decision for them to make in the books.
Yeah, like, where it ends, people are killing trees, let's go to war. I mean, it's not as a bit of a no-brainer.
Which to me is, a bit inconsistent, because they are so slow, and, they probably take a lot of time thinking about these things first before they actually decide and that sort of thing.
But I think they've been, that time, isn't it in the books that they've, or even in the films, when we see them in the latter film, that he says, oh, there's bad things happening on the edge of the forest. So I think the Ents have been talking amongst themselves about Saruman getting up to no good. Yeah. So this is just the straw that breaks the camel's back, and they're like, okay, fine, let's do this. And yeah,
we have another scene with Eowyn and Aragorn. And yeah, she's much more open about her feelings in the films than she is in the books. In the books, like, she sort of just talks to him about that sort of that stuff before he leaves Dunharrow, right?
I mean, let's be honest, like, a princess of this period wouldn't have been like pouncing around a castle, like openly declaring her love for random sort of wastrels. Like, no one else knows he's a king. This is totally inappropriate behavior. But
I wish Mira was in more stuff as well, because I like her as an actress. She has she has a very good. I mean, she's sort of a much more natural performer.
Is she one of those actresses who's probably like really well known in Australia and has been lots of stuff, but just never did much in Europe and America? Maybe
she was in War of the Worlds, wasn't she, for a very brief moment?
Really? Which character was she in War of the Worlds?
His wife, wasn't she?
Really?
Yeah, she was. Yeah.
Blimey, I totally didn't notice that.
Yeah, because she was just in one scene at the beginning and one scene at the end. So that's she didn't do much in the film. And yeah, here we get sort of the idea that the boys have to fight as well. And these look like much more... I mean, I hate it when everyone is sort of, Hollywood pretty, and they don't do it, which is...
Yeah, no, I love the fact that here it's grungy, and also just this is what war is. Like, war is conscription, and it is taking away young kids, World War II, World War One, all wars.
Actually, by today's standards, if they recruited the children, they would they would basically make them child soldiers, which is, completely illegal today.
But it happens, right? And, I think this is what war is. There's no point being pretty and thinking it's all knights in armour who are well trained.
No, of course.
It's John going to the wall. It's people who've never held a sword before being expected to go out.
Yeah. I mean, this is a much more desperate act. It's not because they can. Because they have this.
Yeah, for sure. They just need people to hold swords.
I don't want to justify, child surgery. It's just that in this case here, they, they don't have enough men, basically.
Oh yeah,
And
dear God, let's be clear, we're not advocating child soldiering.
no,
It's just
it's like
that when
it's
you're in
just,
those
it's just
ultimate
because
defensive
I
wars.
studied international law, which is why
Okay.
the observation, because it's that sort of thing. You sort of analyze it by today's standards.
Do you know
And
anything about marine law?
no, I don't know anything about marine law.
I was because I just watched the film Inherent Vice, and apparently it's a marine law term, or that's what they say in the film, and I was just wondering if that was true. But never mind.
Could be. I haven't. I've read the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, but just not regularly. Like, we didn't go into it.
Is that like an anti-piracy law?
I mean, it's sort of like conduct on on the high sea, on the sea, and so sort of there are also like manuals and stuff. There's a San Remo manual which talks about what you can and cannot do in naval warfare, especially you cannot attack civilian ships and medical ships and all that stuff.
Oh
So,
really? So you can't like technically torpedo
no,
convoys like you did
it's
in World War One?
because it's there's a principle that civilian objects and civilians, they should not be attacked, which is the
So in
principle.
today's international law, like if there were a similar law of the air, would it be illegal for stuff like the British bombing Hamburg and stuff?
Yeah, probably. I mean, because that would be indiscriminate. I mean, you have to sort of make the choice that results in the least amount of casualties. It's just proportionate to the advantage that you gain, basically.
I
So
love these
if you're
scenes.
if
Oh,
you're
sorry
right,
to interrupt. I just love all this
yeah,
passing out of the armor and then the big
yeah.
helmet on the little boy and the massive axe that's as high as the boy. Oh.
Mm. And then here we have the Ents again.
I always wondered how they had all the armor though. Like, did they just keep all that armor in Helm's Deep for emergency purposes?
Oh yeah, probably.
But that's
You
like a
never
lot
know
of
when it comes
armor.
handy.
Like, why would no one nick it in peacetime? The reason I ask is because I'm doing this really geeky. Well, of the many geeky things I do, I've decided to do a Twitter account which is kind of like set in 1815.
Ah,
So describing
oh yeah, so Napoleon has just been vanquished.
yeah, exactly. So today they finally signed the Congress of Vienna's final peace treaty and
Oh
split
yeah.
up all the Prussian lands and whatnot.
Mm.
And I'm kind of forward planning my tweets, obviously, for as we get into March, and Napoleon gets back to Paris and suddenly he thinks, shit, we need to start making some more swords, and we need to make some bayonets, and we need to make some some cuirass, the shields and stuff.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's like, shit, get the armorers out. We don't have enough time. Where we can, like the kind of logistics of just, it's all very well marching on to Paris, but then if you're going to face the Allies, within a few months, just where do you get the armory from?
Mm.
So I always find it kind of like weird, like in the context of that logistics, just thinking, so
Yeah,
where is
they
all this
just
stuff
have it
from?
ready. They have it
Mm.
ready, sort of in the armory,
Yeah.
in case it's needed.
I'm
But
deep in military logistics at the moment. I'm reading like about 4 books on, like detailed books on Waterloo at the
uh,
moment. So
yeah,
totally obsessive.
that's here's the thing in this scene where Aragon talks to the young boy. Where I find they've hammered the theme of hopelessness through dialogue a lot. I think they don't necessarily need to do it that much, because you had the previous scene where Legolas was saying that it's hopeless, and then you have Theoden saying that it's hopeless, and then you have the boy saying that it's hopeless.
We get it already.
It's,
It's
yeah, that's
hopeless.
what I mean. It's like but at the same time I don't mind it, because
But this is Aragorn being kingly. Like he's got this
yeah,
young, absolutely petrified kid, and he's like swinging a sword and saying, "This is a good sword." And what he's really doing is saying, "I believe in you. You're with
yeah.
me. We're going to fight side by side." I mean, when people like George R. R. Martin criticize Lord of the Rings and say Aragorn ruled wisely for 300 years, but
Mm.
all the way through this film, we're given hints of how he would rule and how he would connect. It's a
Yeah.
little bit unfair, I think.
Then you have Gimli, with his chainmail. Uh, joke. It's a bit tight across the chest. It's. I mean, it's also something that I think people are overly harsh on Gimli being comedic relief, because he's still a character who occasionally has insightful moments in the films as well.
Oh
So
yeah, oh yeah.
And here we have the elves. I'm not sure how you feel about the elves being at Helm's Deep. Uh,
Yeah, like I mean, I've said this before that I mean, evidently it doesn't have like evidently it's stupid, but when you watch this on the, I mean, not necessarily like here, but when you're on the big screen and you're in that, oh
yeah,
my God, we're standing against the world, and then the elves show up, it's
I
just
think
like it makes you feel so happy. It's like,
I think
yeah,
it's also because in the books, like Legolas wishes that he had like 300 bowmen from the woodland
and they
realm,
turn up.
and then gave him his wish in the film. So
I
you
think it
know,
make I just think it just really makes you happy, and I think the problem is for the non-book reader, they'd be sitting there thinking a little bit like, well, where are the fracking elves and dwarves? Couldn't they help out? And they won't know the
yeah.
context that actually they're fighting wars on their own lands.
Well, they're not as mad about the elves as about the eagles constantly saving the day. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
Eagle
people
Sex Machina.
they might have said, why aren't the eagles helping out in this battle? But it's like, they are.
Yeah,
I mean,
man.
in the books, it's also very very much. I mean, at the end, but it doesn't contribute much. Like in the books, I mean, it's they take on Nazgûls or whatever, but still, this is not the decisive moment anyway. So
But it is just freaking awesome. I mean, just like
yeah,
the sheer joy on Aragorn and Legolas's faces, like, yeah, my homie's here, and he
yeah,
brought bows. It's just so cool. I'm gonna give you a hug. Too much personal
it's,
interaction. I
I
feel
think
very
it's
uncomfortable. You invaded my personal elfish space.
yeah, and Gimli can't see over the wall basically, which is all. I mean, it's a nice
It's
gag
a nice gag, yeah.
there,
And
but
it's not a stupid gag either. I mean, I just think
yeah.
it's lovely.
He says, "Let's hope it lasts the night, right? Hope that they have, and then
I
with
was,
you, Aragorn. Let's hope they last the night." It's also, I mean, I it's some there's a debate. We already had this, I think. I mean, no, we had it on the Hobbit review because we ranked the battles in
oh,
the
okay.
whole franchise. So some people might say the Battle of Helm's Deep is their favorite. I prefer the Pelennor Fields because this is much more, you
Tactically
know,
interesting.
yeah.
There's more
There's a
stages
lot
to
more
it.
natural. I mean, the despair that the characters feel is much more naturally. It comes across much more naturally. Here they have to build it up. Telling
But I
you
have
about
to
the
say
person.
that, to me personally, and I've said this, with my friends many times, that this scene where they're all standing on the battlements and it's Aragorn, Legolas, the elves, and that they can see the army marching towards
Yeah,
you. I often think this is my definition of friendship, which is like, how you'll have like in life some friends who maybe live close to you, and you see a lot and you hang out a lot, and
yeah,
then and they're great friends, but then there's other friends that maybe you don't see very often, and maybe they don't live close to you or whatever, but there's like this shared thing that you have, and like I always think that the way you have to think about things in life is if you were standing on the battlements, who would you
yeah.
want next to you and who would be next to you? And
Mm.
that's how you look at it. Like it's
I
not
think
just his friends in the moments, which it may sound like a ridiculously overthought way of looking at things in life.
there's a scene that was cut even from the extended version, I think, where Eowyn defends some of the women in the caves against
Oh wow.
some of the Uruk-hai. I
They
think
should have
it's
put that
it's
there.
a leader that gets into the cave, I think, and yeah, that sort of thing. They have photos of an Uruk-hai in the cave, basically. But we never got to see that in the film,
That's a
which
real shame.
uh, you know, Eowyn, she's gonna get a chance to kick ass and I sort of like they're sort of like motivational uh stomping and stuff like that.
Oh my
It's
god.
just like they're sort of like Queen when they say we will rock you and that sort of stuff. It's like you have blood on your face, you big disgrace or something like that. Right? It's just like um and yeah, I mean, and this is sort of an accident, and yeah, they sort of. I like the fact that the others sort of don't know how to react to that.
This
And
must have
that
been a nightmare to film in the rain as well.
yeah, I think they said it as well. It's like very difficult to film in the rain and
But
stuff.
it's atmospheric, and it's things like this, that it's nighttime, it's raining, that make, I think, for those who do think this is the best battle,
Mm,
these are the reasons.
yeah.
Um,
The only thing that I sort of miss from the battle is that we don't get to see the Danodings, right?
oh yeah.
Because I mean, in the book, they sort of they surrender, after the battle, and sort of they are told that they just have to help, build up whatever they destroyed and stuff like that. I sort of like that concept that they sort of were tricked into believing that the men of Rohan didn't have any pity for them. So it's like I sort of miss that, but at the same time I understand why that can't be in there. Sorry. And yeah, here we get the elvish bows, and stuff like that. I mean, but yeah, this is basically one huge battle. There's not much to say about it other than it's people die left and right.
But no, I mean, like, there's a lot to say about this, like, because I
Yeah.
played this Sega Total War series, so I spent probably more hours than I should admit at Siege. And in fact, I was just thinking because on February 17th, the next installment of the Total War franchise is out, which is Total War Attila. So it's the crumbling of the Roman Empire and all the...
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But
And I
here,
maybe won't buy it because they've engineered the battle map so you won't have as many sieges. I love siege warfare.
yeah, it's because you have to, find interesting ways to fight your way out of a siege. But here, it's like we also get different kinds of Urukai, basically the berserkers with their with
There's
their
some
long
bloody
blades and
brilliant
stuff like that.
crossbows there as well.
Yeah, and Gimli hits one in the stomach or in the balls. I'm not sure. Um, and yeah, I'm glad they kept the counting game in there because
As all of you
that's
people know who've played Rome Total War, 15
yeah,
denarii for a ladder, 75 denarii for a siege tower. Go for
yeah.
the siege tower. I want to talk about Total War with people. I just feel not enough people talk about this game. It's so good.
Yeah, and here we have like the ladders being set in place and all that stuff. So yeah, that's basically. I mean, we can also talk about the fact that the Battle of Blackwater, at least on the TV show, is much closer to the Battle of Helm's Deep, I think. Um,
Except that no one wears a bloody helmet.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but at the same time, you can't. If people wear helmets, then you can't recognize them and stuff.
Learn the fracking
Yeah,
armor.
uh, yeah. I don't know.
Even Legolas. Like, Legolas, wear a helmet, dude.
He doesn't need one. He's, he can do all sorts of tricks. Um, and
He's not,
yeah,
he's not going to be an immortal with that arrow through his skull, though, is he?
yeah. And here we have Treebeard sort of telling that they're not orcs, fine. Uh, Pippin's sort of slightly oblivious anyway. Uh, and Mary much more conscious. Um,
And it is
which,
interesting, isn't it, how the two hobbits mature and have their arcs at different. So,
yeah,
Merry with Theoden is much earlier than Pippin, and
yeah,
it's kind
uh,
of nice that they're differentiated in that way. It's really good writing, I
yeah.
think.
Because Pippin, I like the fact that Pippin doesn't take everything as seriously.
I mean, at this point,
It,
Pippin's just a smartass, isn't he?
yeah, he's a fool of a took anyway. Uh,
Good line.
Yeah, and we also, I mean, yeah, that's basically the problem. Like when they talk in Old Entish, they take a lot of time to say what they want to say. Um, and that's why I think like, if you can if you can learn a faster language, that would help everyone. But and here we get, the battle again, where they sort of try to ram the door with the
That's the
battering ram
most
and stuff like.
cool. That's the coolest looking siege ram ever. It's just like
Well, not as
awesome.
good as Grund, right? Grund is much more uh, impressive, I think.
Yeah, but like in the realms of
Yeah, yeah,
reality.
yeah. No, that's true. Like Grund in the film is not, very realistic looking, but it is impressive. So, here we have sort of them setting the bombs where we were told the weak spot was, and people who have paid attention will obviously notice that.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, and this is sort of the uh, Olympic Games uh, run, right? The sprint with.
Oh dear.
I like the fact that it sort of has a torch and stuff, but yeah, it's impossible not to make that joke.
Oh dear. Oh look, it's the testudo though. You see, this is brilliant siege tactics. Like a walking testudo. This is so Rome Total War 2.
Here we have the
Impervious to arrows, bitches. You see, this many people would not have fallen at the testudo because people on the outside would have held their shields aside, morons.
Yeah, it's like they are
Basic
very
siege warfare tactics.
next to the wall, and when it blows up, they're going to blow up as well.
Yeah.
Not the best way to. I mean, unless the orcs are not.
I know, using long fracking fuse, people.
Yeah, and here it's also like this is the sort of the point where the battle seems to turn against the heroes. So, and I like the fact that they have to sort of they try to protect the gate, and they're sort of thrown back once it. And here's a Peter Jackson cameo, throwing his spear at an orc, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah,
it's just so ridiculous, really.
I think
and still Theoden is vacillating right at this point. He still hasn't had the gumption to do what he needs to do.
Yeah,
amazing. I mean they've breached the castle wall at this point.
Yeah, but they still fight. I mean, they're still fighting. They're, at least, Theoden tries to prevent them from getting in through the gate. Otherwise, they might have a much easier time, getting to the caves anyway. And here we have sort of the elves. Like, I always felt like when the elves were running, they seemed to look like rabbits for some reason. I don't know. It's like, because of the...
Yeah, but massive freaking testudo on the bridge, guy. I mean, you just missed that. That is a cool bit of siege testudo.
Here we have Legolas on his shield, sliding down the stairs. Which, is also something like, they make Legolas so badass in the films that, it's like he can't take the whole army by himself. But still.
Yeah, let's make clear that shit didn't happen for real. But it's amazing, really, in a way that siege warfare didn't really change materially between sort of Roman times and the 1100s.
Yeah. And here we have... I mean, do you think that the constant intercutting slows down the pace a bit?
No, I think it's really good. Really good.
Yeah.
Because you've got to see the stakes that ultimately...
Yeah.
At all times, you've got to know that this is not a book and a film that's going to be won by brave men fighting on a battlefield. It's going to be won by the hobbits. So, ultimately... This battle only works, ultimately, because of what happens with Treebird. And Pelennor Fields is great, but it only works because of what happens in Mordor. So I think you're paralleling... Like, this battle always has to be symmetric to Pelennor Fields, I think. And we always need to know, it's the Roger Ebert point, that it's all about the hobbits, so...
Just a question, because, like, I'm not sure if anyone has... Do you think it's weird that it's raining in Helm's Deep, but it's not raining here in the, Fangorn Forest?
Nah, you can have situations where it's raining in my house, not the devastation that's around the corner. That's just micro weather. Yeah.
And yeah, this is also an allusion to the scouring of the Shire, which they didn't do.
You see, like you talk about changes that am I annoyed that the elves show up? No. I get annoyed when things like the voice of Saruman are cut out and scouring of the Shire. I think they're really
but they put it back into the extended edition. I'm not as mad about it. And I can see why, they I mean it's ridiculous basically to have Saruman in one scene in the theatrical version, because he doesn't do anything else. He's just, in the first scene he's in, he dies, which is kind of anticlimactic maybe. But still, I think I mean, the fact that they put it back in, it's also like something that Christopher Lee was very upset about when he found out that he had.
And don't piss off Christopher Lee. He has skills.
Yeah, he's a World War II spy.
And a celebrity death match between Christopher Lee and Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson's going home in a body bag, evidently.
And he basically told, Peter Jackson, like, this is not how a dying person screams, right?
I know. We do that anecdote every episode.
I don't want to know where you got that information from, Mr. Lee, basically. It's,
Sir Christopher, I think.
Yeah, Sir Christopher. Yes. And Haldia dies. But, the actor comes back to voice Gothmog in the Pelennor Fields anyway.
Really?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
and it's Lawrence McCory who basically portrays Lurtz in the first film, and who portrays the Witch King in the third film, who also portrays Gothmog. And I mean, as the actor basically, but lines are given by Hallier's actor basically,
Oh, okay.
which I find interesting. Like they sort of play around with voices. It's like the Darth Vader the Darth Vader thing, where they have lots of different actors like physically portraying the character, and then the voice is someone completely different.
I thought it was the same guy, like in the suit of Darth Vader in all three original films.
I think that. I mean, I just mean like James Earl Jones was the voice, but he wasn't
Oh,
actually Darth Vader
yeah.
himself.
True,
Um,
true.
which that's also like, if you have a good voice actor and you want to have a character sound a certain way, you just you don't necessarily have to go with the voice of the actor actually portraying the character. You can just sort of dub it, or ask someone to do ADR and stuff like that, which I think they should do more often, basically, because sometimes it's like you have an actor who looks the part but who actually doesn't sound like
Yeah,
he's
but dubbing, unless you're behind a mask like Darth Vader, I mean, dubbing can
yeah
be really bad.
yeah.
I mean, there's the classic case of, what's that classic British horror movie that was remade
Was
with
The
Nick?
Exorcist? No, in The Exorcist,
No, the
there's
one where it's a Scottish island and all the women are kind of, they put the
oh
policeman
yeah,
and
The Wicker Man.
the Wicker Man, and then they dub Britt
Oh,
Eklund's voice with a woman with a Scottish accent, and it's so bad. I mean,
no,
it's
I
a
think there's a scene.
great film, but it's just, that is not good.
There was a scene where basically the character was naked. I mean, the woman character was naked at some point, and they showed a different actress from behind, because apparently they felt she was more attractive than the actress who played the character.
Yeah, so poor Britt Eklund, it wasn't her arse and it wasn't her
Yeah,
voice.
yeah, and it's like, yeah, that's a rough deal. But everyone was sort of getting frustrated on the set of that film. But yeah,
Yeah.
hope
I mean,
I
it's
mean
still a
at
great
least
film, right? I mean,
yeah, and at least I think with the Lord of the Rings, it's always like, when you listen to the commentaries and stuff like that, they always talk about how much of a family atmosphere there was between the actors, because you spend so much time together on set. Um, but some
especially I
actors,
think for some of the younger ones, like it must have been
yeah,
like their version of university. So
yeah, and I also have something to ask you. I mean, do you think like musical themes are a good thing, or do you think that the music should not be tied to like characters, or
oh no, I like having leitmotif, and I think that
uh,
all for certain types of films. So for this kind of epic film, like the Star Wars films, those sorts of films,
yeah,
I think it works really nicely, and I love that sort of John Williams kind of movie Wagner concept in a way. It's very Wagnerian, but
yeah,
but I listen to a lot of operas. I'm very used to this concept of people having their themes as they come on stage. It feels very natural to me, and especially in a movie where you have this many people and this many landscapes, so to have like a Gondorian theme or a Rohirrim
yeah,
theme, I think it's all part of helping the non-book reader understand which world they're in at which moment. So,
yeah.
so,
No,
so
because
it's
my
part of
brother,
the toolkit, no?
because my brother, for instance, when he watches the films, he says, he doesn't necessarily like the fact that Isengard has its own theme and Mordor has its own
Oh,
theme.
okay.
I mean, he just says like, it's maybe it's just because he doesn't like the music itself for that.
Well, I
Um,
think there is a
he's a-
point that if it's done badly, it can be a little bit cheesy and a little bit cartoony and sort of da da da. Like it's
yeah, yeah,
almost. I find that with a lot of Hans Zimmer scores that they really sort of are too insistent trying to tell you what to feel like.
yeah,
Feel
yeah,
epic. This is the battle. Ooh, feel sad. Someone. I don't
yeah.
want to be over directed by the music. I don't want it to call attention to itself. I mean,
Mm,
John Williams scores to me are perfect, and these scores are perfect because with Howard Shore, it's beautiful music, and when you know the themes, you can pick them out, and it's beautiful. But it never feels like it's dominating the film. It's just part of a
yeah,
beautiful, harmonious whole.
yeah. Because if there are elements distracting you from the action, then that's a problem. But I feel like with Lord of the Rings, that's not an issue. Uh, and here we have, at least there's been some time passing in Fangorn, because it's day. Um, and yeah, so now Pippin has his bright idea. Which it's like, Pippin hasn't been doing much in the film, so it's a good idea to give him the initiative.
But it's also important, I think, for his later narrative arc to see that he's not stupid.
Yeah,
So when he's making these pranks in Hobbiton and the
yeah,
Shire, and later when he's sort of scrumping mushrooms from, or like nicking the palate, like there is innate intelligence, and so when he does grow up, there's material to work with.
yeah. And here we have, basically, convincing Trebet to deliver them to Saruman's doorstep because otherwise, because that's the last place where he would expect them, which, is actually not that stupid, I think. But at the same time, it's like you leave yourself open to being discovered at some point anyway. But, luckily in the film, at least Pippin has the idea that, that's gonna convince Trebet to go into action.
Yeah, but I mean, they know that the army has moved out, right? So, I mean, to that
It is
extent.
also, it is also, I think, the anti-industrialist messages in the book are sort of, I mean, that's part of why I like the books because, I'm a neo-Luddite myself. It's just like I don't, there's a problem for me at some point, but this is why I probably also um I mean, this is probably why I like the story so much as well because it's something popular that people generally like. They feel like they're being lectured when they get an environmental movie. But this is much more. The fact that it's in a fantasy setting is probably more why it's so effective. Because
Hmm.
otherwise, you might feel like, oh yeah, you're being told to mind the environment and stuff. But this is because you've seen that these trees are basically alive, and so you sort of get the idea why they're important to Treebeard, and it's just much more powerful. And I think it's also the fact that John Rhys Davies plays both Treebeard and Gimli, and that they are distinct characters is also very very uh, I mean it speaks to his talents as an actor, I think. And here we have like the big roar of the Ents basically, and the last march, right? Um, do you think that
Again, just not much of the hobbits really. I mean,
Yeah,
Frodo and Sam.
yeah. I mean, here we see the forest moving, right? Uh, yeah, and so yeah, they have business with the orcs, so yeah, they're gonna show up at Helm's Deep eventually. I mean, it's not a spoiler because we
Yeah,
basically
because we
watch
all read
as we go.
Macbeth, right? I mean,
Yeah. Um, and I think the fact that they are Huorns and are hence a bit different from the Ents is also interesting to me because they are much more aggressive in the way that they deal with problems anyway. And I wish we would have spent maybe a scene or two talking about the difference between the Ents and the Huorns and but you don't have time for everything. So and this is probably why people say, well, this is just walking talking trees, but in the books
no,
they actually the
it's not
ants
that
look less.
simple.
But in the books the ants look like less like trees and more like trolls, right?
Exactly. So the Ents here have basically look like horns but act like pacifists. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, yeah, the Ents here are much more tree-ish than they should be, basically. Um,
And here we have Osgiliath again, uh, where I mean this is the only thing that we'll see of Gondor for the moment because they won't. I mean, we see Minas Tirith here a bit in the background, but we don't see it very
yeah,
clearly
which is
because
important because we've got to have
yeah,
one brand new landscape to explore in the third film. We can't give everything away. So
yeah,
I get that.
um,
And that's also maybe, I wonder why they didn't do the flashbacks to Boromir, because maybe they thought in this film they've introduced the whole concept of Rohan, which is very new,
yeah,
and the complexities of Rohan, Saruman, Sauron. Maybe they just felt that they need to keep all that Minas Tirith stuff for
yeah,
the third film.
yeah. I can see why they did it. And here we have Frodo basically going, getting under the spell of the ring.
Yeah, which, I mean, let's face it, it's nearly the end of the second film. He's got to succumb at some point.
Yeah, and I think it's also a nice idea to have sort of Sam's dialogue getting muted, because Frodo isn't actually listening to anyone.
Yeah, for sure, because that's the ultimate emotional dynamic of the second movie is
Yeah.
Frodo cutting Sam out of his life, ultimately physically, so hurtful.
And here's Sam sort of throwing the truth in Faramir's face, basically. We don't get an immediate reaction from Faramir because, we have to have the Nazgul come in, right? And here Frodo basically, getting into meth addict mode or something. I don't know. It's, sort of staring.
Oh, dear.
I mean, I think Elijah Wood.
I think it's really nicely done, though.
Yeah, it's just like once again, my brother doesn't like Elijah Wood as Frodo really because he thinks like he looks too young and he basically looks sad all the time. And I can see where that argument's coming from, but at the same time, I think that for me, it was never an issue.
God, no, I think he's really beautifully done, and it's kind of weird because although technically he's like much older, but in Hobbit terms, he's just a scampy teenager. Like these guys are all scampy teenagers, aren't they?
Yeah, he's about 50 in the books.
Yeah, but they're getting up to sort of naughtiness, so
yeah,
they've got to look. I mean, if we had these 50-year-old men who were acting like, Muppets, then it wouldn't look real. And similarly, if Aragorn looked about 90, so it's fine. I think it's all consistent. They need to look more juvenile and infantile and naive.
Yeah.
Caught up in a world that's beyond their own. I think that's not a problem.
Yeah. And because they have, they learn lessons that you usually learn as a younger person, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Because for them, it's almost like a coming of age movie, and coming of age movies are for like late teens, early 20s. So.
And here we get the Theoden despair moment, at least for a second, because we at least get Glamdring telling them that there's a passage through the mountains, so they still have some time left. And Theoden sort of basically says, what does it matter, basically, because we're all gonna die anyway, and what can we do?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Woe is me.
I can see how people who like the books don't find that, in character, but I like the fact that he needs persuasion, basically, because he, it's like the spell hasn't completely gone away yet. He still has to realize that he can make a difference, and so that there is a purpose that he has. And yeah, now we get. I mean, this is the film where Gandalf basically is mostly absent. So you have, that's probably why most of these characters are doubting so much, because they are not, they're not in the presence of the wise advisor and all that stuff.
Yeah, but I mean that makes them seem a little kind of weaker again, doesn't it? Because
I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. Anyway, so here comes the big Theoden redemption, get some balls scene.
Yeah, which I like. It's also like, at least, let this be the hour where we draw swords together. It's also from the book.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome dialogue as well.
And now for Wrath, now for Ruin, and the Red Dawn. I think it's from the third book, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, this is a shame because we should explain to the listener that another colleague from Vassals of Kingsgrave, Duncan, was going to come on to this podcast because he has a fondness for great battle speeches and Barristan Selmy moments in Song of Ice and Fire, and I think it would have been cool to have him do some of this dialogue. But he's going to hopefully be on the Return of the King podcast. But this is very much a Duncan type of a moment, I always think.
There's also sort of, like the Aragorn speech and that.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, if you notice, here are two Legolases, basically, one behind the other.
Huh?
On the right, the people on the white horses.
Ah.
Legolas.
Weird.
Yeah, it's like, they probably had one that they had to create via computer because they didn't have enough. So they said, okay, let's just go with the guy on the right, not maybe realizing that it was.
That is so weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, do we need to talk about the Christian imagery of the first light on the third day?
Yeah.
A god is resurrected.
But I think that, the Christian imagery is much less pronounced in a lot of rings than in the Chronicles of Narnia, which is probably why
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis and Tolkien got into a disagreement because, Tolkien didn't like stories just being like uh one-to-one allegories.
No, he's right, and I really agree with that. It's like Brideshead Revisited. Like I remember reading it the first time and being shocked when I then read the prologue and it said this is a novel about the operation of grace on a young man, and I was like, really?
Yeah,
And I like my religious stuff to be firmly in the background. And
yeah,
I like it to be elegant and delicate and fragile.
yeah. And here we have,
Oh yeah, like can we just like give a shout out to Gimli for blowing the massive
yeah, I must have
horn?
yeah, which I don't know if who blows the horn in the book. I don't recall. I think
It's
it's
probably just some random Rohan guy, isn't it?
could be, yeah. And I mean, we didn't get the speech that Aragorn gives to the orcs right before Gandalf,
Yeah. But like
which
when they ride out, it's so cool.
yeah. I mean, if Aragorn sort of goes outside and tries to negotiate with the orcs, basically, or talk to them. I mean, that would have been interesting, but yeah, it's probably would have slowed down the pace a little bit.
But for anyone who's played Total War, if you try and like ride on horseback down a tiny, narrow, downward sleeping slope, it's not going to be good for
Yeah,
anyone.
yeah, and this is basically, but they obviously rode into the pikes and stuff like
This
that.
is very Napoleon, though. He did this shit all the time.
Yeah, and
Like,
here
kind
we
of
have,
pincer you down and then just come with some cavalry on your right flank and just.
and here we
You're
oh,
trapped.
the
Eomer.
it's getting set on fire. Yeah, and they basically.
In fact, this actually, like, I think I'm about 30 seconds behind you, but the scene where Gandalf turns up and then all of Eomer's troops behind him is very Waterloo. It's very the British infantry as the final French assault comes up the hill,
I thought
and
that
they
was
get
Lucia, the Prussian army that came to the rescue at the last moment.
yeah, but before that, so
Oh yeah,
basically you've got the British infantry are having to hold them off until the
yeah,
Prussians arrive.
yeah,
I mean, absolutely, absolutely, you needed the Prussians to win that war. Don't get me wrong.
yeah.
And so the French look up the hill and start their main assault, and they've beaten the first line of British. I think that's it. And then over the crest, they suddenly realise there's a whole nother set of regiment behind, and they're
Mm.
fucked. So topography matters in battles, is what I'm trying to say.
And here we have all the miniatures getting destroyed by water, which I also think this is a cleansing, basically, of all the bad machinery.
Of course, this
That's
is a baptism, right? And part of baptism is an
yeah,
exorcism of evil. So you can take it as far as you want.
yeah. I'm not sure I want to, because then we can basically go into anything like is Saruman Satan because he's sort of like the misguided guy who gets corrupted and
The
stuff.
fallen angel
Yeah. Well,
who decided to go up against God and tries to, and in
mm,
fact tries to challenge even.
yeah. But we have that stuff with Melkor, and Sauron to a certain extent as well. So it's like they all have a. I mean that's also something that is brought up in the book where Gandalf says nothing is inherently evil, even Sauron. So it's like
Not even machinery is inherently evil.
no, no.
If we
It's
want to
just
not be hypocritical about it, there's no need to destroy the furnaces and shit.
yeah. I mean it's because they killed their tree friends. So it's like I mean the
Yeah.
machines aren't alive, so that it's just it's probably better.
I always
Uh,
used to think the bursting of the dam scene was particularly cool as CGI goes.
and here we have the Nazgul basically trying to take the ring, and Faramir kills it. Oh no, no, doesn't kill it, but he shoots it with an arrow.
Finally gets it.
Yeah, and it's not just that. It's also like this is something that happened. I mean, the scene with the Nazgul, doesn't it happen also in the at the Anduin basically,
Hmm.
where they have where they sort of the where they see sort of some flying thing and Legolas shoots it with an arrow. So I guess it's just sort of a callback to that.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, here we get. I mean, Frodo much
Oh
more.
my god, it's so cute. The scene where the little Huon, his head's on fire and he kind of
Yeah,
plunges it into the water.
it's like a shower.
Oh,
Uh, and yeah, here we get Frodo basically also saying, "I can't do it, Sam," and I know, and yeah. But Sam is a much more level-headed character. He's much more average than all the other ones.
And it's
Like,
weird, right? Because he always feels to me older than Merry and Pippin and Frodo, and
yeah,
and yet they're all aristocrats, and he's meant to be the working class guy, and in a
mm,
way dumber, but he always comes across as wiser to me.
yeah, because he makes simple observations that are actually much more closer to the truth.
But he also makes very eloquent speeches. Like he's
Yeah.
the one who persuades Faramir and says, "Look, can you see it now? You've got to let him go." Like in so many crucial points, he's the one who is very articulate. So
Yeah.
Sam's so awesome.
Yeah, and here we have Sam's speech, right? Which is a good speech that wasn't. I mean, I think it was partly in the book, right? Uh,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. He makes it at some point. I'm not. I don't remember. I don't recall exactly when he does it, but yeah. And basically, if you haven't watched the extended edition, sort of this is the last time you see Saruman sort of going into his tower and never coming out again.
Oh,
Uh, yeah,
such a shame. That
yeah.
just annoys me big time.
But it's
I mean,
just
I'm over it now because this film came out like 15 years ago or 25 years or whatever it was.
yeah.
But yeah, I was not happy at the time.
But yeah, here we also get a short image of Gollum sort of thinking about what Sam is saying here, right? Which is, it's a misdirection somewhat, I think,
In what way?
because you're meant to think that he's conflicted here, or that he at least recognizes that Sam is saying something that's true. But later we basically know that the Gollum part of him wins out anyway. So I'm not sure why they had it in there, because it's eventually it doesn't change anything, because Gollum's still gonna betray them. So
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense in a way.
yeah, and here we have Faramir finally gets it, saying let them release them, uh, and yeah, they're sort of telling them to go through the passage after that. But first we have the Urukai running into the forest, which is never a good idea, because those trees went there before. It's like, they didn't have.
Like elementary common sense. Oh, and that's going to be a torturous ending, isn't it? That is not going to be
Yeah,
happy.
they didn't in the books. They didn't find any trace of the orcs, right? Or I mean, they sort of.
Yeah, it's just ghoulish. It's a
Yeah,
really, I mean, like it's worse in your imagination because you don't quite know how these horns did it to them, but whatever it was just like really
I guess
fracking
they
brutal.
just
Like being eaten by a wild boar, like a vegetarian version of that as a death.
they just killed them with roots and buried them under the earth, right? Something like that. And here we have, Eowyn. Just glad that Aragorn made it, and this is this is a scene from the extended edition where we get the final score of Gimli's and Legolas's counting game, right?
Isn't
Uh,
that in the main film?
no, this is not in the main cinematic version, because he has he's Gimli's sitting on the Uruk-hai basically, and they're talking about their score. He's got 43,
And then
and
there's the final one to get killed.
yeah, and Legolas can't have that, so he tries to have it at least equal, and he was already dead because he was twitching, but because he's got his axe embedded in his nervous system.
Technicalities.
Yeah, it's like when you're playing Monopoly and someone saying, "Oh well, I still have enough money. I can still buy a property." And he's saying, "No, you got on my spot." But
I do
yeah,
get quite stupidly competitive playing Monopoly.
yeah, and here we have Merry and Pippin sort of comparing their height. The world is back to normal because
Indeed.
Merry has a bit of an inferiority complex, I guess. And so, I mean, this is a nice scene because in the books you sort of don't know. In the books you sort of get the idea that they found the stores, and yeah, that's sort of the place where Saruman keeps all the nice food that he doesn't give to his orcs.
But it's also, if they had put two and two together, the place where they find all the Longbottom leaves, so they
Yeah,
should
which
have figured out that he had spies in the Shire or dealings with the Shire,
yeah,
and yet they
which
just
makes me
totally don't get it.
because to me, I mean, I think maybe this was maybe they wanted to have that subplot in the end, uh, but they decided against it, But maybe they already shot this scene
But
before.
they actually put that scene in, so it was almost like they were giving themselves room for it. But then once they've spiked
Yeah,
Saruman on the cartwheel,
yeah.
it
It's I
was
mean,
like there's nothing
but
left.
to me, that's a much more efficient way to end it because it's sort of the irony, irony as well. It's just like he gets impaled on his spike that he's sort of used to
Oh, bad joke.
sag the. But yeah, and so yeah, they're not gonna be hasty anymore. And Treebeard, I mean, I don't know. It's like he's never smelled pipe weed before, I guess.
Yeah, but it's like burning leaves. I mean, that's not shit you
Yeah.
should do in front of a tree. Oh
I
dear.
mean, I'm a bit sad that we didn't get more of Treebeard in The Return of the King because we just got
Yeah,
him at the
that's
beginning.
true.
But at the same time, I see why they can't fit it in there because they had already so many endings. Um, and here they sort of Faramir tells them about the tunnel, underground passage, sorry. Um, and yeah,
Secret Passage is a little bit cheesy as well, in
yeah. But
fairness.
this is also a quote from from the book where he says, where the Shire must be a great place where gardeners are held in high esteem
I
or something.
know, it's so cute.
Yeah, it's this is why I like the extended editions because you get so much more of the source material anyway.
Exactly. Exactly.
And now we get the name of the path, Kjarth Ungvar.
All the book readers are going, oh no.
Oh yeah. Well, I was going like finally because the Frodo and Sam story in the Two Towers. I mean, I had trouble getting through it because it was a bit slow.
I think a lot of people do, right? And, despite the fact that the screenwriters have tried to sort of give it more action in a way,
Yeah,
it's still, you can tell it's something that's been stretched out way too
yeah.
long.
But at the same time, I see why they needed to because otherwise you are ending up at a place where it can't match up with the rest of the action.
And maybe they felt they couldn't just leave out Sam and
Yeah,
Frodo for the whole movie, which is right. So,
yeah, true.
I think it's the best they could do. It's not easy. And I still think it's certainly better than Tolkien's solution, which is to split the books in two.
Yeah, here we have Sam trying to make friends with Gollum finally. Because I mean, in the
Yeah,
books,
right.
it's sort of. I mean, he's much more antagonistic towards Gollum in the films than he is in the books. But yeah, it's nice that they also managed to pull this scene where they're sort of trying to have a reasonable discussion. Uh,
Mm.
and so Gollum basically, I'm not sure if he's. I mean, I would say in this moment he's still uh honest when he says there are no hard feelings and stuff. It's only when the Gollum part comes in later that he definitely makes up his mind. And yeah, this is something like I know why all the important characters are in a line, on horses and stuff, and they're looking at the exploding volcano in the far distance.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
But it's
That's.
it leads into the third film. It's sort of like building anticipation and stuff.
I actually think they do quite a nice job of sort of making it seem like a proper organic ending to this
Yeah,
part of the story, given that they weren't intending to have a middle film, and it's kind of a weird mishmash of some bits of the other film, the other book, and not having Shelob or whatever. So it's kind of like I think they make it feel like it was always intended to be cut off at this point, which
yeah,
is
yeah.
what you need.
And here we have some thinking about the stories they're gonna tell, which I think is a nice moment. It's sort of it's cute in a way because he's always like the guy who is much more interested in fairy tales and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
So
exactly. He wanted to set off
yeah,
and see the elves and
yeah,
Oliphants and
yeah.
yeah,
And he has seen both of them at this point, so he's actually
he's
seen
doing well.
yeah, and yeah, that's actually I'm not sure. Is this in the book where Frodo says that For the wouldn't have come far without his Samwise. I think that
Yeah, there's definitely the bit where they're like, what about, tell me more about the fairy tale of Sam the Brave,
yeah.
and that's all in there, definitely.
And here we get the last discussion that Gollum has with himself. Um, and it's also weird, like you wouldn't think that when he's talking about putting out their eyes and stuff like that, that sort of thing wouldn't fly today.
Do you not think so?
I mean, it's because like it's a very violent image. It's a very violent imagery. I guess if you have a fantasy film, people don't expect that kind of stuff anymore. Because the films that came after Lord of the Rings and sort of tried to imitate it, they didn't go in that direction. They didn't go into the more adult stuff, I think.
But this
Really
is dark, and the
yeah,
third film is going to be very dark. So
yeah.
that it has to start. It has to happen.
And Gollum is still like you have the Smeagol, uh, but notice that he's saying that it's too risky, not that it's wrong to do it. He's just saying that they would get caught if they tried to do anything.
Yeah, because I
So
mean,
it's not
which is
like he's
clever,
rejecting
right?
out of moral principle.
Yeah, it's slippery, which
Yeah,
is right.
I like his facial expression. When he couldn't do it. It's like he's um, much more alive than some of the other characters. Right?
Oh,
He's
for
super
sure.
facial, the expressions and all that sort of thing. It's like very much alive to the point where you actually question whether or not it is a CG creation. So um,
Yeah, which is the ultimate compliment.
yeah, yeah, and so
But I love
yeah,
that Peter Jackson brings it back to the Hobbits, and I think that shows how much it changed from here to the Hobbit trilogy. That here, no matter what else was happening, he always remembered that the Hobbits are the heart of the film. And I
yeah.
used to think
Hobbits,
with the Hobbit itself as a trilogy, sometimes I felt he just forgot that the Hobbit
yeah.
is always the heart of the
But
film.
that's the problem of splitting it up into three films. Like if you had made it into one film, like maximum two, then you could have gotten away with giving Bilbo. I mean, with stretching out the material, I think, because otherwise, like you have to sort of create a three-act structure, um, where it already has a three-act structure, and a 300-page book just doesn't. I mean, there's not enough in there to sort of justify three films, like unless you fill it with a bunch of other stuff. And I feel like the Lord of the Rings trilogy didn't. They actually needed to cut stuff out.
Oh
They did.
yeah, there's very little fanfic in Lord of the Rings, whereas The Hobbit is like
Yeah.
90% fanfic and 10%
But I mean,
Tolkien.
most of the stuff that happens in the book happens in the Hobbit films as well. It's just that in between you have all this other stuff that isn't from the Hobbit. So, um, and I don't recognize the singer who sings the end song. Because I know that Annie Lennox sings "Into the West," right? And Enya was "May It Be" in the first film, but I don't recall who this is.
Let me Google it.
Uh, and yeah, now we get the endless credits. I mean, that's also I'm sorry, that's also something. Uh,
It's someone called Emiliana Torini,
oh,
Gollum's song. It's
doesn't ring
really
a bell.
beautiful. I actually like own
Yeah.
it on iTunes, and it's a beautiful song. I always think her voice sounds a little bit like Bjork.
Oh, does she? Oh, yeah, maybe. I mean, I always found that she sounded maybe. I mean, slightly like someone who smokes. I think. Uh,
There's just a texture to her voice which is very
yeah,
compelling, I think.
and it's actually the Gollum song. I think. If you listen to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
lyrics,
it
it's
is.
about, Um, and I think they succeeded in making Gollum an integral part of this film at least, and the next film. Um, but yeah, I think I enjoy the Two Towers the least because I can recognize that it's the middle film, right?
Oh, but I
Well,
love. I mean, this particular, as we said last time, this particular half of the movie is one of my favorites. I mean, I think
mm,
Denethor I find fascinating, Faramir, Pelennor Fields, all that, but and for Frodo, oh my goodness. But this half, because it's got the Gollum Smeagol disintegrating, it's got
yeah.
Faramir Boromir, it's got Helm's Deep. To me, this is about as fun as it gets.
Yeah, no, it's a very good movie nonetheless. It's just like out of the three films, like I think people either put Fellowship or The Return of the King as their favorite. Um, some people might say like the middle film has the problem that you have to get the characters from A to B basically, and in the third film you have everything coming to a head, so there's a much more.
It's more splintered, and actually, the first half of this film is one of my least favorites because it is
Oh,
just everyone running around and being separate.
oh yeah.
So I could see that on average it would probably be kind of in the middle, maybe.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, apart from that, I think that if they should ever release the extended editions in cinema, I'd definitely go and watch them because, I mean, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, it's because I always miss because apparently they don't do it here where I live. They don't show all three films in one row. So it's yeah, I heard that that's what they usually do when they have um when they had the Hobbit films coming out, then they
Yeah,
this
for sure. That's a very British thing. Like I can promise you that before the new Star Wars film comes out at Christmas,
uh,
there'll be cinemas doing the original trilogy back to back before it. It's easy money. So
and the prequels.
yeah. Oh my
Uh,
God.
yeah, I mean that's also something that I don't think that the Hobbit is on the same level as the prequels, the Star Wars prequels. I mean,
Oh no. I mean, the
it's,
Hobbit
but
movies are fine. I mean, there's nothing.
they're not great. They're just
But they're
okay.
fine, they're not offensive in the way that Jar Jar
No,
Binks is
yeah,
genuinely racially offensive. So,
yeah.
you
I
know,
guess it's also because people say, well, it isn't perfect, so by that definition, it sucks absolutely, which I always disagree with
well,
because
life must be miserable for those people because
yeah,
nothing's perfect, and you
yeah, because
can't go
it's
through
like
life thinking that. I mean,
so high expectations. It's like
yeah,
same thing
and also
with
it's just a movie. Like, get
yeah,
over it.
yeah. It's the same thing with The Dark Knight Rises. Like people were so in love with The Dark Knight that they said, oh well, he didn't manage to top it, therefore it sucks absolutely. But I just go, well, there are good things about it. There's good
I
acting in
like your attitude.
it.
On
Yeah.
that happy note, maybe we should
Yes.
formally close out the main body of the podcast as we're
Uh,
well into the end credits and say once again, really, really fun getting your insights on this film, Matthieu, and thanks to the listener for bearing with us through basically four full-length feature films.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you haven't gotten through this yet,
Yeah, and listening to
you're
us
not gonna
babble
stick
on
with us.
through
But
them.
yeah. Like,
Um,
let's hope you're gonna make it with us. But
exactly, all the way to Mordor. So next time we will be doing the first half of the Return of the King extended edition, and hopefully we'll have Duncan, aka Valkyris, with us. But yeah, and just to give a final shout out to VOK Podcast with lots more
but
Tolkien goodies.
by the way, I also just saw someone in the credits named Duncan, so it's like at least
Spooky.
it's the consolation prize.
Mind you, these end credits are so long, you can probably find someone with all our names in, right? I mean, it's just like
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like,
It's also
everybody's
something
in
that I've
there.
noticed, right? It's like you have so many films nowadays where, due to the special effects and etc., you have so many names in the credits, like where previously you wouldn't have like 10 minutes for the credits and stuff. But maybe there's a shift in the other direction now because um, there are uh, films that, I mean, there are films that are very successful in the mainstream that don't rely on heavy special effects and costuming and all that stuff. It's just that to me, it always seems strange that, after The Lord of the Rings, like you have 20 minutes of credits to name everyone who was working on it. And it's just shows how much of an enterprise this was. Like to me, the fact that they worked on this for 7 years is actually, that's why I think, when people say, well, Peter Jackson, because he changes things or adds stuff, he doesn't respect the source material. I tend to disagree because I mean, the guy put 7 years of his life into this. So for me, it's
He's evidently a fan. It's not a question of respect. It's just, we're all
it's
fans,
not.
and if we were all given the chance to adapt things, we'd make choices, and some people would love and some they'd hate. But they come from a good place.
Yeah.
I've no doubt they come from a good place.
Do you think that someone at some point is going to try to remake these films? I don't think that's even possible at this point.
I mean, I've
Because,
said it before. I think they will because there's just too much money in it not to.
but how will it, I mean, if you look at the credits, you sort of know that this sort of thing takes time and effort, and it's just so immense that I think that people are not gonna want to do it because it means essentially spending buckets full of cash.
Yeah, but to get buckets full of cash, I mean, these are some of the
Yeah.
highest grossing films ever made. So
But I think it's probably going to take a couple of years before they do it. I mean, probably because I heard that they wanted to do a remake of Ben-Hur, so that's like,
that's happening. Sergei,
yeah.
that's being directed by the guy who did the original Nightwatch movie. So that's happening.
Oh, okay.
I want someone to remake War and Peace, like the original Sergei Bondarchuk one, with a full military shit going on.
To me, just the idea of remakes is like, why would you want to remake a film that you love? Like, do a remake of a film that has a bad idea, that is badly executed, but has a good idea at the center. Like that makes much more sense because then you can improve something. Like when you mess up a remake of a very popular film that is considered by many to be a masterpiece, then it looks much worse.
But the worst is when people do shot by shot remakes, like when Gus
Oh
Van
yeah.
Sant made Psycho. I mean, other than doing it as an indulgence so that you understand the technical nuts and bolts of how they did it, I mean, like that's even worse than doing a remake and trying to give it your own spin. Like, what's the point of that?
Yeah, it's like, the Carrie remake. Did we need that? I'm not sure.
Oh God, no.
Yeah.
But even like the Ghostbusters remake, okay, they're doing it with girls, so I guess that kind of makes a
I mean,
departure. But the Ghostbusters original film was on TV the other night, and it's awesome.
yeah, it is.
And
I
actually,
mean,
the effects are really good. You don't need another Ghostbusters movie. Go home.
yeah, no, go hard or go home, right? So,
Yeah, just
uh,
and don't just go home.
yeah, don't even try.
Maybe that's the appropriate ending for this podcast. Listener,
Yeah,
go home.
yeah, because all these characters essentially want to go home. Like, I mean, Sam and Frodo want to go home. Like, everyone wants to go home.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, it's
Yeah,
late at night,
yes, of course.
and so we've done 8 hours basically TV
Oh,
commentary.
wow.
Another more to go. But it has been a pleasure, Matthieu, and
Yes,
I wish you a happy weekend, and same
you
to the
too.
listener.
And yeah, see you next time, guys.
Cool. Bye.
Bye.